What if I told you that the thing you fear most, uncertainty, isn't a weakness to get rid of, but this very skill that could change your life? Today, we are going to learn how to master it from someone who has faced uncertainty in the highest stakes imaginable, former US Navy SEAL and author Rich Diviney. Rich has completed more than 13 overseas deployments where every second was unknown, every outcome unpredictable, and yet he and his team thrived. He spearheaded the creation of the Mind Gym that SEALs use to train their brains to perform faster, longer, and more effectively in the face of some of the highest stress environments. I can barely contain my enthusiasm for this conversation because if he can teach elite warriors to operate with clarity in chaos, imagine what his tools could do for us and our anxiety. Let's consider this a masterclass on how to become a master of uncertainty. Welcome, Rich.
Well, thank you, Kimberly. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I have your book here. You can see I've tagged a bunch of things. It was such a wonderful read. You're an amazing author and so inspirational. The reason I loved the idea of getting you on is you bring, interestingly, a different approach to managing uncertainty, but still very in line with the tools and concepts that we're talking about here on the podcast all the time. So can you share, it's a broad question, but how can somebody, let's talk about you first. You're out in very, very stressful situations. I have been on a binge of learning all about Navy SEALs lately. I don't know why. I'm on my third book, and I find it so fascinating how mindset is such a huge piece of survival and getting through really hard things, even like your buds training.
Yeah.
Tell us how you, as a Navy SEAL, manage those highly stressful, highly difficult moments.
Yeah. Well, it's a very broad question, so I'll just take it piece by piece. And I think the first thing we want to think about is this idea of uncertainty and kind of how it manifests in our lives, in our systems, in our environment, and what our reaction is to it. And I think one of the biggest things we have to recognize is that there's a specific type of uncertainty that in fact we're talking about having to get good at managing. And it's the uncertainty that actually causes fear, because fear is really the thing. Uncertainty is external to us. I mean, it's all external. Fear is the internal thing that's happening in our system that's causing us all of the stuff, good, bad, or indifferent. And so one of the things that we did, and Andrew Huberman is a neuroscientist at Stanford, and he and I are good friends, and he wrote the foreword of the book. But he and I were working on this years ago when we first met, and trying to determine really what we were talking about here. And one of the things we hypothesized is that fear is in fact a combination of two very distinct factors, and those factors are uncertainty plus anxiety. So uncertainty plus anxiety equal fear. The reason why this matters is because you can have one without the other. You don't necessarily have fear. You can be anxious without being uncertain. Well, that might be, I have to give a presentation next week to my colleagues. I know the presentation. I know my colleagues. There's no uncertainty there, but I'm just a little anxious about it. Okay. There's not necessarily fear there. You can be uncertain without being anxious. Well, that's every kid on Christmas Eve. And we know there's no uncertainty there, right? So there's no fear there, right? So it's when you combine the two that you in fact get fear. And so one of the things we want to consider is that there's the way you begin to combat or decrease the fear is to decrease either one or both of those equations. You decrease uncertainty or you decrease anxiety, or both, most likely both. And so each of those requires specific tools. We're going to talk about both, I know, but let's talk about anxiety first. And because anxiety is a big one. And one of the things that Navy SEALs do, and I just want to give a context with which the audience can reframe uncertainty. We think of anxiety as fiction. In other words, anxiety is always ahead of us. It's always something that it hasn't happened yet. We're just worried about it happening. So it's all fiction. The past is history, the future is fiction. Now the effects of anxiety, the stress induced by anxiety is absolutely present. And that's what we're really talking about. But as soon as we start thinking about reframing it, because one of the things you'll never see Navy SEALs do is worry about stuff that's too far ahead of us that we can't control. Now that does not preclude proper planning. We of course plan our missions. We say if X happens, we'll do Y, but we don't overplan and we don't suffer paralysis through analysis. We pick one or two or three top things, plan some things, and then we say, hey, when we get out there, we'll figure it out. We will not restrict ourselves by worrying about stuff that's in the future. So this is exactly why, by the way, we would be in our helicopters flying into combat, for example, and the guys around me would be napping. They'd be asleep. And it's because we're conserving our energy. We're not going to waste any thinking about what's ahead of us. That anxiety, we're taking that we're taking that away. All that said, the stress that is induced from our anxiety is very real. That autonomic arousal that happens and our amygdala gets tickled and we know that, and I'm preaching to the choir here, we know that our frontal lobe, our decision making part of our brain, begins to actually recede to take a backseat to our limbic, our emotional center. And in the extreme cases, this is amygdala hijack or autonomic overload, where our limbic brain is now in charge. Our frontal lobe has taken a full backseat and we are acting without thinking. Now that's very handy when we're jumping out of the way of a moving train or running from the bear, but it doesn't come in handy for about 99% of everything else where we want to actually engage in conscious frontal or conscious decision making. So part of that ability to reduce the stress that is induced by that anxiety, that autonomic arousal, is to start looking at techniques that reduce our autonomic arousal. And I know you've talked about this, you teach it. There's visual tools, there's respiratory tools. There's also many other tools, but any of these tools that we use, whether visual or respiratory, what that's doing is it's bringing our autonomic arousal down. It's in doing so, bringing that frontal lobe, that decision-making part of our brain, back to the fore so that we can begin consciously making decisions and, in fact, consciously dealing with the uncertainty part of it. So you almost have to manage that anxiety piece so that you can actually deal with the uncertainty piece. So that's kind of part one in understanding this. Reframe what anxiety is, and then also start thinking about ways and tools that you can actually bring that autonomic arousal down and bring that frontal lobe, that decision-making part of your brain, back online.
Right. You talked about being in a helicopter, flying in to where you're going to do something that I would think would be terrifying. And I'm sure my limbic brain would be flipping, but yet your folks are sleeping or napping. I was watching a documentary on the weekend about the buds training. And I thought it was so interesting that they'd said they were rolling in water and then rolling in sand, and then they had to run 4 miles. And he said, before you run 4 miles, get down and be in the push-up position. And then he said to the guy, what are you thinking about? Yeah. And I was thinking, I'm going to be thinking this run is going to be hell. But he said, I'm thinking about the push-up position.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And that's the work. So can you tell us, like, again, you're talking about these visual and, sort of bringing yep. Can you talk about what that looks like?
Now, so what you just talked about, by the way, is actually getting into the tools to decrease uncertainty. Okay, so let's just assume that we are in a position now that we have our autonomic arousal managed to the extent that we can actually start thinking and making decisions. So we're not hijacked by our amygdala or otherwise. So now we have to think about, how do we buy down uncertainty? One of the things we have to understand about how our brain processes our environment is our brain is constantly trying to create and generate certainty. That's what humans love, certainty. We love to understand what's going on. And so in doing so, there's 3 primary factors that our brain is trying to figure out in any environment. Those are duration, how long this is going to last; pathway, what's my route in, out, or through; and then outcome, what's the end state of all of this. If we are in absence of one or more of those factors, we begin to feel that uncertainty bubble up, and then of course the anxiety and the stress that comes with that. So we'll just give you an example with let's take illness as an example. So strep throat is an illness we all know, we all understand. There's an antibiotic that can cure strep throat. So most people in today's environment do not die or seriously affected by strep throat. So if we get strep throat, we are in fact in absence of only one of the 3 factors. And so we know the pathway, it's an antibiotic. We know the outcome, we're going to get better. But we don't necessarily know is the duration, because you may respond to antibiotics a little bit differently than me. It may take you 2 days, it might take me 3 days. So we're only absence of duration, which means our uncertainty level and therefore our anxiety level is maybe mild. Now let's take the flu. The flu is also a known illness that in today's environment, at least, most people in today's world do not die from the flu. We all know we're going to get better from the flu, but there's no known cure for the flu. In other words, there's no antibiotic or medicine you can take. There's a lot of people who have crazy ideas about what you should do, but there's no known codified thing that works works for everybody. So if we get the flu, now we are in absence of two of these things. We know the outcome, we're going to get better. What we don't know necessarily is the pathway, what route to take, and then the outcome, or excuse me, the duration, how long it's going to be. So our anxiety, uncertainty level is now at the moderate. Now let's imagine a disease shows up and we've never seen it before. There's no known cure or vaccine. Some people are dying and some people aren't dying, and we don't actually know how long this is going to spread across our planet. Enter 2020. This is why during COVID, we all felt the way we did, because we were in absence of duration, pathway, and outcome. And we were at kind of max uncertainty, max anxiety level. So the tool, the technique, and you just mentioned it, because any SEAL that you ask how they got through training or get combat, they'll give you an answer that highlights this tool, is the ability to, in a moment, ask yourself, what do I know and what can I control? You pick something to focus on, you pick a horizon, and you move towards that horizon. Now, what you're doing in essence is you are creating your own duration pathway outcome. You're generating certainty by creating your own duration pathway outcome. I'll give you another SEAL example, which you probably saw in these documentaries. In BUDS training, you spend hundreds of hours running around with these big, heavy boats on your head. And certainly before Hell Week and during Hell Week, everywhere you go, you have these darn boats on your head. And I remember being, it was during Hell Week, I think, and it was 3 a.m. We were running with these things. We'd been running for hours, and we didn't know how long we were going to be still running with them. And we were on the beach. There was a sand berm next to us. All of us were miserable. I remember saying to myself, you know what? I'm just going to focus on getting to the end of this sand berm. And what I did in that moment, inadvertently, was I basically picked a horizon and then created a duration pathway outcome. Duration from now until end of sand berm. Pathway from here to end of sand berm, and outcome end of sand berm. Now, by doing that, I, again, inadvertently manipulated my own dopamine reward system by giving myself a dopamine push that allowed me to begin to execute that goal. And then I also gave myself a reward at the end that also gave me a dopamine reward when I accomplished that goal. So in 2 ways, I'm manipulating my own dopamine system so that once I hit that goal, I could come back out and ask the question again. Now, the interesting thing about these horizons are very subjective to the individual and subjective to the intensity of the environment. So in other words, the more intense environment, the shorter that horizon probably is. In SEAL training, that you spend a lot of time freezing in the surf zone. In fact, most people quit SEAL training because of the cold, not because of the physical stuff, right? And I remember freezing in the surf zone and saying to myself, I'm just going to count 5 waves. That was my horizon. Sometimes the horizon was, I'm going to make it to the next meal. Sometimes it was, I'm going to run to the end of the sandbar. What we have to understand is by picking a meaningful horizon, we have to understand our own dopamine system and understand that if we pick too much of a horizon, too far of a horizon, we will in fact run out of dopamine along the way. Dopamine, as you know, as most people know, because it's kind of very well known now, it used to be known as a reward chemical. It's in fact a motivation chemical. Dopamine is what gets us up in the morning, gets us going. And if you pick a horizon that's too far away, then you are going to run out of dopamine along the way and you are going to quit. Anytime we quit anything, it's because we've run out of dopamine along the way. So you want to pick your horizons. By the way, if you pick a horizon that's too short, too close, you're not going to actually feel that, you're not going to register the reward enough. You're not going to feel anything. So we can modulate. And the good news is you can modulate as you go. If you pick something that feels too far, you can bring that horizon in. But it's all very subjective. All we're talking about, though, the primary tool, the reason why on the video you said, I'm just thinking about the push-up position, that was the horizon in the moment. And I remember being in SEAL training and I was freezing in the surf zone. And I said to myself, well, soon I'm going to be doing push-ups on the beach and I'm going to be really hot. That's my next horizon. And sometimes I was doing push-ups on the beach and I was miserable, really hot. I was like, well, soon I'm going to be freezing in the surf zones. So you start picking these things in a way that's very meaningful. And this is exactly how we buy down uncertainty when we look at those 2 equations.
So, just quick question. When you said you had the sand berm, in that example, how far away was that? Was that 5 seconds? Was that 50 seconds? Was that 5 minutes? And I know you're talking about it's constantly adjusting, but in that moment, is it the more discomfort you're in, the shorter that horizon? Is it a personal decision? Do you have advice on that? Because some people with anxiety are going to have, let's say they're having a panic attack. Maybe they're getting on an airplane. In their mind, they're like, their uncertainty is that it might be for the whole flight, but how might they make that decision?
Well, the great news is, so first of all, it is entirely subjective. It's personal. So there's not much advice you can give to someone because it has to be part of the moment. I will say that you can modulate it. So in other words, you could pick a horizon and if you were like, oh my gosh, that's too far, you'll feel that. You can bring that horizon in. What's really cool though, is you can actually combine the 2. You can combine buying down down uncertainty and buying down anxiety, you can say something like someone getting on a plane, they're nervous. I'm going to take 10 breaths right now. That's your horizon. You take 10 breaths. In fact, one of the ways we practice this, Huberman and I actually determined that one of the best ways to practice this in an intense yet safe environment are cold plunges. Because I don't know if anybody, 'cause I'm sure some people out there do cold plunges. I have one in my garage and I do it. And by the way, I hate it every time I do it. I dread it every time I do it. It's so cold. It's just awful. People's like, well, you're a SEAL. You're used to the cold. You can't get used to the cold, where you just can't. Okay. But the cold plunge is one of those things. And my wife and my son wanted to try it when I first got one. And I was like, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. As soon as you get into the cold plunge, I said, as soon as you get in, I want you to stare at my hand and count to 10. I gave them their first horizon. And as soon as they hit 10, I said, okay, now pick another point on the wall and pick a number. And they picked the next horizon. And both of them got through at least a minute and a half with their first try. But we can actually combine just 10 deep breaths or 5 deep breaths or counting waves. And so part of the process is experimenting as you go through. The coolest thing about this is you can actually practice, you can exercise the picking horizons muscle, and there doesn't have to be an uncertainty involved. I mean, most of us, if we work out in the gym, we do this automatically. No one goes in the gym and thinks about the entire workout. Say, oh, I'm gonna do arms, I'm gonna start with biceps, I'm gonna just do this set. You could do this at work. Hey, I have all the stuff. You know what? I'm just focus on just doing these 10 emails or these 5 emails or this 1 email, whatever that is. So you can practice this act picking horizons in any environment so that it can then be applied. But I would say when you do feel that autonomic arousal rise up, that anxiety, all that stuff, the physiology of stress, combine it with some of the other tools and say, I'm gonna take 10, I'm gonna do 10 physiological sighs, which is one of the best tools to actually, bring down autonomic arousal. Do that. And then once you're done, okay, what's my next horizon? And start working through the project that way.
So, folks with anxiety, they don't want to be uncomfortable. We could argue that you signed up to be a SEAL. You signed up to be on the airplane. You signed up to be on the sandberm. And people with anxiety may be thinking, I don't want this. What would you say to that? Or what are your thoughts?
So first, again, it's a part of it's reframing. All right. And we have to understand that life itself is going to produce anxiety and stress and hardship and challenge. A couple of things we have to think about. First of all, stress is not a bad thing. Stress is nature's design for us to get up and moving. In other words, when we feel hungry, our body's feeling stressed. It's telling us to go get food. If we feel lonely, our body's stressed. It's telling us to go find companionship. So stress is by design, by human nature designed to get us up and moving. And so one of the things I always tell people is don't demonize stress because it's there for a reason. Now, we certainly don't want to get hijacked by it. And these are some tools we just talk about to not get hijacked. But stress is, if we weren't stressed, we wouldn't do anything. So it's, we wouldn't feel motivated to do anything, so we can't. And honestly, every human being is going to feel, you put someone on vacation, for 4 days, they love it. 5 days, they love it. A week, they love it. 2 weeks, they love it. A month, they start getting sick. I got to get back to my life. This is too easy. We always want some sort of challenge, some sort of stress. So it's a good thing. We also need to reframe fear. Fear is quite literally nature's risk assessment tool, okay? It's telling us there is something out there to be cognizant of, right? Be careful. It actually produces some biochemistry in our system that actually gets us focused, gets us on alert. So people think SEALs are fearless. We're not fearless at all. In fact, I always felt like fearlessness was if I saw fearlessness, I would get them out of my group because fearlessness means I'm going to see complacency. That's the bulldog run into the charge without thinking. We need fear to keep us from being complacent. My fear of heights allowed me every single time I had to jump out of an airplane, which I had to do hundreds of times, to really start saying to myself, okay, think about my emergency procedures, make sure my equipment's all set, right? And so we don't want to ignore fear. We want to understand the benefits of it. We don't also, though, want to get sidelined or muted or restricted by our fear. So the idea is don't be afraid of fear. It's very natural, but just don't let it restrict your movement. So start understanding that this is the way you can actually move through life more effectively. And the last note on this, just a little bit more reframing. If I were to have any human being draw on a piece of paper a line, a straight line, and maybe the left side of that line represents the day that person was born, and the right side of that line represents today. And I would just say, map out the highs and lows of your life, right? The great stuff and the bad stuff. The great stuff can be above the line, the bad stuff can be below the line. And then connect those dots. All of our lives would look like a sine wave, okay? And this is the spice of life. I say anybody who loves roller coasters, I usually do this in a crowd. How many of you who love roller coasters would want to get on a roller coaster that only went up or only went flat? No one would like that ride. Okay. The reason why people love roller coasters is because it loops and goes ups and downs, right? This is the spice of life. So I think part of this, and again, it's easier said than done. I do admit that. But part of the reframing process is to understand that this is the spice of life. And we can start to conquer and really move more confidently through those lows. Man, it opens up a whole new world of our possibility and our potential.
Yeah, I love that you say it's an opportunity. You talk about attributes. Some folks with anxiety may feel like they don't have any of the quote unquote attributes to, or they haven't strengthened them to move through high levels of uncertainty. What are your thoughts on, and I know you attributes is a huge piece of the work and another part of your writing. Do you want to share a little bit about what attributes maybe Navy SEALs need to get through these moments and what attributes people with anxiety can rely on?
Yeah. Well, the good news is that when it comes to attributes, everybody has all of the attributes. We all have all of them. And we talk in the book, in my first book, I talk about 25. We now have 41 that we talk about. We have an assessment tool and everything. We all have all 41 attributes. The difference in each one of us are the levels to which we have each attribute. So if we take adaptability, for example, I would say I'm about a level 6 on adaptability, which means when the environment changes around the outside of my control, it's fairly easy for me to go with the flow of all of it. Someone else might be a level 3 on adaptability, which means when the same thing happens to them, it's difficult for them to go with the flow. They are still adaptable because all human beings are. There's just more friction there. And so if we were to line up these attributes on a wall like dimmer switches, all of us would have different dimmer switch settings, which start to speak to our own unique attribute profile, our attribute fingerprint, if you will. Now, the cool thing about this is that we are all kind of like, I always relate human beings to automobiles. We're all automobiles. In other words, we all have the same general parts and makeup, but some of us are Jeeps and some of us are Ferraris and some of us are SUVs. And there's no judgment there because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. The key is, what kind of vehicle am I? And so if someone starts to understand their attributes, they start to understand their own unique attribute profile, what they recognize is there's no judgment here. This is who I am. So if you were to do our assessment, for example, you'd see your top 5 and then you'd see all 41 ranked, but you look at your top 5 and your bottom 5. It's not like a personality test where your top 5 and bottom 5 equal strengths and weaknesses. In other words, your success as a human being is as much because of your bottom 5 as it is your top 5. Your low patience has made you successful in certain ways. Your low charisma, you pick whatever, your high. Now, each one of these also comes with some blind spots. In other words, your high decisiveness, while advantageous, also comes with some blind spots you have to be aware of. But the key is to take the judgment out of these attributes and have everybody understand that your unique attribute profile is exactly what makes you the human being you are. And there's tremendous success in that. Now, to kind of address your other question in terms of uncertainty, the bad news is that we can't predict uncertainty by definition. Which means we don't know exactly what attributes are going to be required depending on the uncertain moment. So whatever your profile is, you're fine, right? Compartmentalization is one of the attributes. Compartmentalization, I would say, is probably, if you want to move horizons effectively, compartmentalization is the attribute that allows you to do it. So if you're lower on compartmentalization, all you need to do is begin to practice horizon shifting, horizon moving. You will get better at compartmentalization. Some of us are a little bit higher on compartmentalization. It's a little bit easier for us just naturally, but we all have the capability. So the idea would be understand your attribute profile. If you find yourself low on some of these attributes that you think are so essential, say you're low on adaptability, then guess what? You have now given yourself the conscious ability to, in the moment, recognize that you're going to be low on adaptability and say, you know what, I'm going to be low on adaptability. That's why this is feeling so bad. I need to address that in how I'm acting. By the way, what that's also doing, bringing your frontal lobe back online and allowing you to decision make. It's actually taking away the anxiety because you're actually bringing your frontal lobe back online. And so all of this to say that understanding ourselves to the most precise levels that we can provide us the opportunity to not only interrogate our own performance after the fact, but interrogate our performance during the fact and actually, in fact, perform better.
Amazing. Has there ever been a time where you couldn't get your brain back online? Has there been a time where you got hijacked by anxiety and uncertainty and fear? And where were you? What were you doing? And how did you get back?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I will say is, and I'll say this quite honestly, is that if you get good at, and when you get good at moving the horizon process, fear goes away almost completely, or at least gets postponed. Right. And the example would be, I can say quite honestly that there was never a moment in my career, whether we were in gunfight or combat or whatever, where I was afraid. But the reason is not because I'm fearless. The reason because in that moment, all I was doing was picking horizons. I was working the problem. Do this, then that, then that. So much so that in many of these cases, after the fact, like everything was over, back at our, all the reports have done, I'm back by myself in my hooch or whatever. And then the fear starts hitting me. I start thinking about, it's like, oh my God, that was close. And you start feeling it after the fact because you look back.
Wow.
But in the moment, I was actually just working the problem. And I was watching an interview with Buzz Aldrin, and the interviewer saying, "Hey, you're in that lunar lander with Neil Armstrong, and you're landing on the moon. Never been done. There's so many things that go wrong. Were you afraid?" And he's like, "I wasn't afraid because all we were doing was just we were doing what we needed to do in the moment. We were just working the problem
Mm.
moment by moment by moment. They weren't again hijacking themselves with anxiety, thinking about things they didn't need to think about. They think about the now. So that is one thing we have to understand is if we move horizons effectively, we can actually mitigate or take away, or at least delay and postpone fear so that we're actually acting in the moment. But I will say that there have been times where after the moments, I was like, oh my gosh, I've had to like, okay, breathe for a second because that was really close, right? But again, that's a better place to experience it and work through it because now your environment is in fact certain and safe. But in the moment, no, we really, I mean, buds alone, SEAL training alone, really just it hyper develops this ability to work the problem and focus on the moment.
So it was funny. I've been again going through a major deep dive on this. I don't know why I'm so fascinated by it. My husband, it was even like, "This is getting crazy, Kimberly. What's happening here?" Just so I'll explain something for you so you can explain, we can talk about it, is a lot of the treatment we have for anxiety disorders and OCD related disorders is this fairly intensive lean into fear model,
Yeah.
right? Like identify specifically what your fears are and then go and face them. Pretty like on a hierarchy from easiest to hardest, but maybe not. Sometimes we have to go straight to the hard. And it's pretty intensive. Like that's the work that we do.
Yeah.
List out the things you're afraid of. Let's go. And that's not that much different to Bud's training. I mean, it's very different to
What's acting? Psychologically and physiologically, no, not much different.
yeah, so we call it exposure and response prevention. That is the specific type of treatment. It is an example of the buds training where you guys are just being pushed. Now, you guys are doing 10 out of 10 to the point where you either drop out or you make it through the day. And we are not doing that on our end. But if someone was having to sort of step into treatment and it's like stepping into buds training where you have, I think it's 5 weeks, is it? Or 9 weeks?
Well, it's 6 months actually, but yeah.
Isn't there like
Fifth week is Hell Week, yeah. So you have that's a big crucible, yeah.
So, is there a part of the training of Navy SEALs similar to that in that you're trying to push someone so to the level that everything sort of seems easy beyond that? What is the psychology of going? So, we're constantly in our community really negotiating and questioning and discussing how much is too much, or, to what degree do we push our clients that is ethical and kind. And so for you guys, it's a whole different environment. I understand that. And it's a completely different goal. But can you talk to me about the extremes and the degree in which you push and how that may impact someone's ability to tolerate and become a master of uncertainty?
Yes, but first I do want to just remind the audience that the thing about fear is that fear is subjective. And this means yet the physiological and psychological effects of fear are identical. But what this means is that you can have a group of Navy SEALs in a gunfight with Al Qaeda, and they are literally in that moment feeling less fear than the 8-year-old you just asked to step in front of the classroom and introduce themselves. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to make sure everybody understands that comparative, it's not a good idea to compare fear. Okay, because we're all afraid of certain things, and so SEAL training is one thing, but SEAL training for me, I'm sure there are aspects of SEAL training that would terrify most people, but were fine with me. Whereas, maybe, starting a conversation with a stranger for me is like, that's tough for me to do. So first, let's just make sure everybody understands we're all human and the SEALs aren't superhuman. We're just managing our fear in different ways. And for some people, they're not even feeling fear. I mean, some people don't like it. For some people love jumping out of airplanes, but they don't have to manage anything. So it's subjective. The cool thing is the tools are all the same because since the physiology is the same, the tools you can use to actually manage your fears. Here's the other thing I'll also say. Two things. First of all, there is a part of the brain that psychologists and neuroscientists discovered, I don't know how recently, maybe a decade or so, called the anterior mid cingulate cortex. And this part of the brain, actually, they realized, they discovered, gets activated when we do challenging things, when we do things we don't want to do and it's challenging and it's hard. And in fact, when we engage in those things, that part of the brain, in fact, grows. And it's been linked, the growth of that part of the brain has been linked to a couple things. First of all, it's linked to longevity. People live longer. As the more it grows, the longer you live. And it's also been linked to the ability to actually do more hard things. So I think one of the, again, these are facts that people can put in their toolkit and they can remember, is that by pushing yourself, you're in fact making yourself live longer and making hard things better, easier to do. So this is why even now to this day, I try to still engage in things that are hard. Math is a great example of that. I don't like getting into it. I got into it this morning. I dreaded getting into it. I didn't like it, but it's growing that part of the brain. So I think one of the encouraging factors is that we are designed to, in fact, grow from doing hard things. Now, again, it's going to be a subjective thing. And I think we want to make sure that the things we're asking people to do, the horizons we're asking people to pick, they're just outside the comfort zone, but not too easy. They're somewhere in that sweet spot. Because again, if it's too hard, then you're going to quit. You're not going to want to do it. The saying in SEAL training for Hell Week, and just for your audience, Hell Week is a week where you start on a Sunday afternoon and you go all the way to Friday, the following Friday afternoon. And during that entire week, you sleep for about 2 hours for the entire week, right? The entire week. And just, you're constantly wet, sandy. Yeah, this is where most people quit. It's actually, you get most quitters during Hell Week. But one of the sayings in BUDS training when you're a student is, if you think about Friday on Monday of Hell Week, you will quit. Never think of the entirety of SEAL training at all. You're always picking horizons. And so in the conduct of people picking challenging things to do, just take it in small steps. Take it in small steps, because you'll feel that, you'll register that reward, and it's going to be different for everybody, but just step by step. People who always talk to me about, I want to start working out, I want to get in shape. It's like, okay, well, just start going to the gym. You don't even have to do anything. Make the transit to the gym, look around, and then leave. And the next day, do it again. Eventually, if you do that every day, you're going to pick up a weight once in a while, and you're going to start doing something. And that's going to translate slowly into you working out. But you generate these habits, right? So that's another thing. And the other final thing I'll say is that the interesting thing about this equation, uncertainty plus anxiety equals fear. Another reframing technique that I've used before and that I can offer is that when you combine uncertainty with other things, different results take place. So uncertainty plus curiosity equals excitement. And so part of a strategy, again, this is easier said than done, is to sometimes be able to ask yourself, hey, can I actually turn my anxiety into curiosity? An example I'll give you is, again, that I don't like heights. So I also don't like roller coasters. I've never been a fan. My wife loves roller coasters. What's interesting is that, just from a subjective fear thing, right? When we get on the ride together, we're going on the exact same ride, okay? She's feeling uncertainty plus curiosity and excitement. I'm feeling uncertainty, anxiety, and fear. So by the end of the ride, I'm drained and she wants to go again, all right? All this to say, we were at Universal this last spring, and it was her birthday. And she said, hey, can you ride this Velociraptor, which is like the fastest roller coaster, right? Now, so I'm going to say yes because I love my wife. And so I'm getting ready to go on that ride. And I say to myself, okay, well, I grew up wanting to be a fighter pilot. I wanted to fly fighter jets. I ended up going SEALs. But I said to myself, you know what? While I'm on this ride, I should pretend I'm in a fighter jet. I'm flying a fighter jet. That's what I'm just visualize. And I did that, and it worked. Now, I can't say that at the end of the ride, I wanted to do it again, but I certainly had a different experience than I would have had I been reduced to, total fear and anxiety. So just generating some curiosity about something you are anxious about can help to change your fear to excitement. And that's actually a powerful tool.
Amazing. Last question, and I could talk to you for hours. We here talk a lot about self-compassion. People are suffering. They're really, they're having such a difficult time. They're constantly being terrorized by scary thoughts and so forth. And we talk a lot about having a kind voice, an encouraging voice, someone who cheers them on to sort of help them, I think, get to that next horizon. Because maybe they haven't got a strong inner coach that coaches them to the next horizon. Is that a piece of your work? I'm guessing that folks, Navy SEALs, aren't practicing a ton of self-compassion.
Yeah.
I'm making that assumption. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I think that there is a misunderstanding that self-compassion is just kind and warm. Sometimes for me, it's like, you can do this. Come on, get to it. Get to the work. That it can be both. But is there any training for Navy SEALs who are doing this really difficult thing and they're moving horizons they're constantly facing? Are they trained on the tone of voice or how to coach themselves? Or for them in that extreme environment, is it more helpful to be more gritty key in the way they talk to themselves?
The first answer is no, no, we're not trained in that at all. No one's trained in breathing. Anytime you hear someone like, oh, it's Navy SEALs trained in these breathing techniques, that we never got trained in any breathing techniques. We just figured out on our own. So same thing with self-compassion. Although I would say it doesn't mean we don't do it. And the way I'd actually define it is just self-talk. And self-talk can be compassionate. It can also be non-compassionate, be very abrupt and violent. I mean, so I think what a key is to figure out what works for yourself, because some people respond to self-talk that's very encouraging. I know people who they need to stress themselves out to actually get moving. So their self-talk will be about stressing themselves out, saying, hey, if I don't do this, then this disastrous thing will happen. Okay, now I'm going to do it. So I think absolutely self-talk works. I think the key is to find the self-talk that works for you as an individual and start noting those and using those as triggers. And again, what you're doing quite literally is whenever you're self-talking, you're bringing that frontal lobe. Anything you're doing in a moment to bring that frontal lobe back online, it's why in your field, I mean, the whole name it to tame it when it comes to emotion. That's why that works, is because by naming it, you're taking your brain out of the limbic into the conscious mind, and you're actually pulling yourself back into a conscious state of good decision making. So any type of self-talk that works, do it. Figure out what works. If, I wouldn't say beat yourself up all the time, but I mean, listen, David Goggins, a famous Navy SEAL, and I know David, we went on at least one deployment together, but his whole thing is a very violent self-talk. It's like crushing demons and crushing souls and all that stuff. But for him, it works. And he's inspired a bunch of other people to work for it to work as well. So find your own thing that works, I think, is the.
Yeah. Amazing. So, do you want to round this out? What we've been talking about how to become a master of anxiety. Is there one message you want to leave us with, particularly for folks who struggling with uncertainty, their brain telling them what if all day long? What are your final thoughts?
Well, I will leave the audience with this, and this is really the reason why I do this work and why this work inspires me, and that is because these tools will, of course, allow you to, when practiced and mastered, will allow you to, of course, deal with uncertainty, challenge, and stress when it hits without warning, which is always going to happen. That's just life. But more importantly, more inspirationally, is that when you are good at these tools, when you start getting really good at them, you begin to deliberately step into uncertainty. And this is where all of our growth, all of our evolution, all of our discovery lies. We are, in fact, a species that has gone from cave dwellers to space explorers because of this ability to step outside of our comfort zone very deliberately. That's where the juice of our potential is. Our potential is always outside our comfort zone. So to anybody who is willing to practice this and make the journey, yes, it'll help you in those moments when it hits without warning, but you get really good and you'll deliberately do it. And that is really takes your life. I feel like that's why I've been able to do what I've done. I mean, I deliberately made a choice to go to SEAL training, and it changed my life, and it continues to change my life. But this is the power of the tool.
Yeah, I love that and I do think the success I've had in my life has only come by accumulating minutes and hours of being uncertain. The most success is almost directly related to how uncertain it was.
Yeah.
I totally resonate with that. So, oh my gosh, thank you. I cannot thank you enough. I swear to you, I don't think I've ever been more excited to interview somebody. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. So thanks for a wonderful discussion. And I always love to get the message out to people who can really use it. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Tell us where we can hear more about you, get your book.
Yeah.
I want to know where we can learn more.
Well, it certainly is on Amazon. Both books are on Amazon. Theattributes.com is our website. So it's www.theattributes.com. And there you can look at both books. You can look at our attributes. You can take our attributes assessments and look at a bunch of stuff we have there. So, and then of course I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn as well. So.
Amazing. Thank you again. It's been an honor.
Thank you.